Hello, welcome back. So I analysed the Sowray game. Obviously, I found some mistakes once I went through it with an engine. So, firstly, I just did my own annotations. This is what I recommend. But then I went over the game with an engine to find out what mistakes, if any, I had made. There were quite a few. So, we're going to go over that in this video. Obviously, from a human perspective, it's very hard, even if you're a grandmaster, to annotate a game to the level of accuracy that a machine will do. So we're going to see to what degree my analysis matches up with the machine. Okay, so how do we get the first move on the board? Okay, so let's just crack on through the opening phase. So we've already analysed this opening before. And of course, it's very important to get the opening right. But I think in this game, we really want to talk about the middle game positions. Yeah, and I think the first really critical moment, I think all this is okay. A3 and F3, the machine kind of agrees with all this. It feels that this is fine. What I did was probably, A3 might have been the top move. F3 might have been either the top move or the second best move. So that's obviously a good sign if you're playing the moves that the machine agrees with. Bishop F1 was fine. So all this is fine. So all this is fine. Up to this point, probably played quite a reasonable game. Possibly Queen F2 wasn't the best. Possibly Bishop D4 also wasn't the best. But let's just consider this position. It's a critical middle game position, typical position that you'll get in the game. You understand that black wants to play A6 and then C5, push the bishop back. So it kind of feels like a position where you need to do something quickly, right? Well, the machine comes up with a suggestion here that I didn't really consider during the game, and it's very typical. It's a move that Simon Williams would certainly consider. It's a move that machines are loving a lot. You probably already guessed the move. But if we use the kind, I think there's a saying in chess, and I read this once in a book by a trainer of Garry Kasparov. I believe his name was Alexander Nikitin, and he said at some point, if there's a famous saying, it's always useful to know all these kind of sayings. If you can't find a useful piece move, or you can't find anything useful to do with your pieces, make a pawn move instead. So in this position, the logical move is to play h4. This is a good move. So essentially, you feel like your pieces are in an ideal position. Bishop looks good on d4. Okay, we'll get driven back, but black's going to have to waste a move. Can't play c5 immediately because of knight b5. So we've got to move to do something. Rather than my suggestion of f4, where this structure at the moment is quite good, we first play h4, h5. The more you look at this move, the more logical it becomes. I think I've had more time in this game. The problem is obviously 2 rounds a day. The time control is quite fast. I'm not Magnus Carlsen. I don't know exactly what plan you're supposed to play in every position. I haven't. Obviously, I'm a grandmaster. I'm a good player, but I'm not, super GM level. At least not yet. But yeah, h4 is a good move, and the idea is you're threatening h5. So if you imagine if black does nothing, white will eventually go h5, take on g6, and let's just say that black fiddles around. We go here, and black should play c5 here. But let's say just to show you what white's plan is. Now, if we take with the f pawn, we clearly weaken a lot of the squares around the king. For example, e6 is now very weak. We go h6. Now, we could just go f4 anyway. But I think a move like queen h4, this is to show you what we're threatening to do. Now, knight e5 is going to run into f4. Big problems for black. f6 just drops a pawn. So the only logical reply is bishop g7. Now I get the position I wanted all along. And maybe a move like queen e7 is going to spell problems for black. You can't play, well, you can play rook e8, but then I take on d6, win a pawn. You can't move the knight because you drop c7. Or can you? Again, you can move the knight. Obviously, you can move the knight, but you just lose the queen. So So you probably, your only decent move is d5, but then that would, at the very least, probably drop a pawn or just open up the position, not in black's favour. So that's one potential plan that white is threatening. Could also consider just playing f4 as well and just going for the attack. So h4 was certainly the move that I should have played. Didn't consider it. A very interesting middle game position. We'll see this h4 more and more in chess, and how it's a very concrete way for white to play. Computers are loving h4, but I feel like you can play h4 a lot of the time in these middle game positions when you've got control over the position, which white has in this particular example. Now, black's obvious reply would be to move h5. Maybe that's kind of what I saw in my analysis. But now I go f4, and there's a big difference. Lines like this are now a lot more dangerous for black, because clearly when I take on g6, you're going to weaken your king side. So something like this could happen, and yeah, the position looking a little bit precarious for black. Not lost by any means, but a little bit shaky. So interesting idea. So I didn't go h4, and I played knight e2, which the machine agrees with. It feels the evaluation drops after that move. Not the best move, and his c5 was definitely the best move. So again, I could have considered h4 was the top move. Very interesting idea that I could simply go h4 anyway. There was another idea, which was to yeah, actually, this is a little bit later, actually. Like, yeah, it's interesting here that I could have played, which is something I didn't really consider, which was to play the move c4 here. And this was not really something I really gave a lot of thought to, because I thought, well, okay, if he takes, I take out the bishop. Yeah, I think I did actually briefly consider ideas of c4, but I thought you just go here, and I didn't see a good follow-up. It's very interesting what the machine comes up with here. So again, you know, when you're analysing games with machines, I would suggest analysing them beforehand, which I've done in this case. You know, but I don't generally do. I generally get lazy like most people, and I stick the game on the machine immediately. You should be conscientious and study it with a machine beforehand. Sorry, yeah, you should study it by yourself beforehand, and only later maybe then check with the engine. Although, you know, you could argue just don't check with the engine at all. I would prefer don't check with the engine at all to just lazily checking with the engine every time. I think that's a better way to improve, is to use your own analysis, use your own brain. You know, people say that engines help you to improve your chess. Well, just to give you an idea, back in the 1990s, we didn't really use engines much in analysis. You know, when I first started getting good at chess, I would say, like, you know, IM, GM, kind of close to GM level. I didn't become a GM until I was about 2005, or 2006. But essentially, yeah, computers back in the late 1990s weren't that strong. You know, you had your kind of default Fritz. People used to use that for kind of blunder check. And of course, engines back then were still pretty good. You know, they were, you know, obviously Kasparov lost to Deep Blue in 1997, so you can't say the engines weren't strong then. But generally, the engines we were using on our laptops weren't anything like as powerful as they are today. But yeah, back in the 1990s, mid 1990s, I was already a very strong player. Am I any stronger now, even though I use engines all the time? Not really. So, you know, that is the argument, that maybe engines don't really help you to improve your chess, and maybe they can make your chess worse if you just make you lazy. So, analyze your games, but, you know, by all means with computers, but do remember the, so stuttering a bit there, do remember the limitations, because essentially you don't have the engine when you're playing your game. Okay, after the move c4, the main point is that, so I was babbling a bit there. The main point is that after bishop c6, you play this amazing move. Sorry, not b3. It's very limp, very limp. You play this move b4. This is what the machine just wants to blow up the position. The machine just loves to play as directly as possible. And it's blowing up the position in white's favour. So imagine if you take here, all of a sudden, the position is starting to look a bit suspicious for black. The rook is coming to c1. White is making a lot of ground on the queen side. So what other options does black have? You can't really take on c4. Clearly, I'm threatening maybe just to make some ground on the queen side. So a move like knight e5 is possible, but then you take on b5. We get a variation like this. And white is slightly better. According to the machine, you can play a move like bishop b4. Maybe later on you play bishop c3, try to exchange this bishop. Possibly this is also possible, but then that would run into some kind of pin. So yeah, overall, yeah, imagine a scenario where white was able to trade this bishop. Then he would have a fantastic position because the knight would be coming into g4 with very obvious main attack. And this bishop on c6 is not a great piece, actually. It's kind of biting on granite. So very interesting option by the computer. I didn't consider this in the game. So again, you know, this can maybe improve your understanding of these positions that use these engines. Let's just quickly go over some of the other ideas it came up with in the game. There was one other very interesting option that it suggested. Yeah, it did suggest my bishop e5 was a slight mistake. And yeah, I think he probably should have taken back with a pawn. I think that was the practical option because white would really have less than nothing then. No real attacking options for white. But taking back with a bishop was perfectly fine. That I gave that as slightly dubious in my notes. That was a mistake. Shouldn't have given that as dubious. It was absolutely fine. It's just a slightly risky way to play because now white is putting the pressure on the king side. So clearly from a practical perspective, Peter might have been better off going for d takes e5. But of course you want to keep that bishop as active as possible on that diagonal. So yeah, you can play either way. It's perfectly fine. All this is fine from both sides probably. I took on d5. What else? Yeah, now he probably could have taken with a rook or taken with it on e1, but he took here, which I gave as a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. So again, when you're annotating games with, by yourself, it's very easy to be dogmatic and think, well, this is bad. You know, back in the day, people like Karpov used to annotate their games, and they'd be very unobjective, and they'd just say, "Oh, I was winning the whole game." And then you run these games through machines now, and they're just full of mistakes. So, yeah, something to consider. But in this position, I played a move d6. Now, after my next move, after Sowray's next move, white is already winning, and at no point later in the game did black have an option to recover. You know, essentially it was very, very difficult for him after the move queen d8. But the machine is very full of resources. It finds this move queen c6. Now, short of time, you could very easily dismiss queen c6 because you think, well, I'm just pushing the pawn on. And it looks like a winning position for white. But actually, this involves quite a clever trick. Because after the move d7, which, you know, at first sight, that looks completely winning, right? There's this move, bishop to f6. Now, again, variation carries on. You queen the pawn. Clearly, you don't want to move the king. You're going to lose the game. White has any number of winning moves. For example, just taking the bishop, even simply would win the game. But the problem, of course, is you take. And now you move the king up. This is where the brilliance, the resourcefulness of the machine shows itself. White has, well, actually not a good position here at all because I'm going to have to move the queen and then I lose the rook for nothing. And I'm going to be a pawn down and he's going to have the two bishops. And I'm probably going to end up losing the game against, you know, a player as good as Sowray. So if Sowray had found this, he might well have even won the game. But very hard to see when you've got no time. This amazing resource, queen c6. And he gives variations like knight e4, for example. It says it's just unclear. I'm not exactly sure what black should do now. Maybe a move like rook h5 is possible. But yeah, very tough to find. So I think from a practical perspective, rook f5 was a bit risky. Of course, then you need to find queen c6. You need more time. This is why this time control in these tournaments are very, very tough. Magnus Carlsen recently was saying in an interview that he is in favour of maybe playing the World Championship only if they play 2 classical games a day. The guy needs to play 4 NCLs for like years on end, and then he might have a different opinion. Anyway, that was the analysis of the Sowray game. I hope you enjoyed it. Fast and fun, that's what we all like. And that is my advice about machine games. Analyse your games, but with machines. But at the same time, use them sparingly. Do your own analysis as well.